Thank you so much. This is going to be quite discombobulating because I think in order to hear really, really well, you're going to have some lovely headsets on. Hi, everybody. I first noticed brands when I was growing up in Canada. And as a matter of fact, this was a brand that was kept in our house by my mother right beside our toilet. And it, of course, was the required cleaning aid that you needed in order to clean the toilet. But amazing semiotics or signs happening here. I mean, are the Dutch known for fabulous cleaning? I don't know, but in Canada, I thought they must have been. But great typography, amazing logo, nice little wooden shoes, really signifying the provenance for me and where they were from. This lovely icon, or this lady wielding her toilet brush with some good purpose. This was excellent toilet cleaner at the time. It was brilliant. But then this launched. And I was, what? And my very first branding mistake that I ever made in my life was I thought the same company had done this. And clearly it was not. But there was a lesson here in branding in terms of, A, somebody didn't do proper IP protection and explore what were some of the other brands that were out there. Because in my mind, Old Dutch smelled of bleach and reminded me of the toilet. And it wasn't something that I then wanted to eat. So I never could reconcile these brands. So when you go around in a lot of conferences today, a lot of people talk about the things that they did that were outstanding, that were amazing case studies, best practice. What I want to talk about today actually isn't a masterclass. It's going to be my disaster class. I'm going to talk about the mistakes I made. I'm going to talk about the things that I did wrong. And with a retrospective point of view, things I go, oh shit, got that wrong. But I thought it'd be useful to take you through some of what happened to me in my marketing career. I have had the benefit now of working for some major brands, some icons, global icons like Glenfiddich, Grant's Whiskey, working on Jim Beam, some bourbon, some small startups, some craft breweries, some small wineries. And I've come back to it and come back into global brands. And it's having this kind of working on big startups and small startups. I've seen a lot of branding exercises. So I'm going to take you on a whistle-top tour of what has driven my learning for the last I want to say 20 years in marketing. But there's three considerations for me when I look at branding now. The first one, is it human-centric? I mean, everybody talks about consumer point of view, and that is absolutely a huge part of being human-centric for me. But actually, it's not. It's beyond humans, beyond just consumers. It's the entire human process of what we do as marketers. I need to sell it into our sales team. I need senior buy-in. I need them to give me budget. Right? I need to then have our sales team might actually be a global sales team that's selling it into the local markets. There's a lot of humans involved in this process, and I need them to get what I'm doing. There's memorable and meaningfulness in the brands. So as per the example I just showed you, sure, Old Dutch had meaning for me, and it was super memorable, but it wasn't the right one, was it? I was thinking bleach, and they were trying to get me to eat chips. And then the third point around being cohesive and consistent. This, for me, has turned into a continuum, because there are brands that are very cohesive and I would say almost too consistent, and they go to cookie cutter. And then you end up on the other end of the spectrum where you don't have consistency and you end up with chaos. But these are 3 points for me that are really important. And hopefully the case studies that I'll take you through, my mistakes, my disasters, will show you where I got it wrong, but how I learned. So I have a 13-year-old son. He's a bit of a perfectionist. I blame his father. And instead of actually making mistakes, he's been afraid of it. He hates making mistakes. And as a parent, as a mentor and a coach in the business place, mistakes are imperative. You are never going to hit perfection. Nobody goes out first time and is absolutely perfect. It is progression, and it is mistakes and building on things that get you the best experience. So I love that. There's a former colleague of mine in the audience from when I used to work on this business. So we'll see afterwards. We'll talk to him and see what he thinks about this. So my first job working in the spirits industry actually was in Canada, and I worked for William Grant & Sons. And I worked on the entire portfolio in Canada as the marketing manager, and I got a job there. I was recruited in from an Ontario winery. Yes, we make wine in Canada, I promise. And I worked on Grant's Whiskey. And I got introduced into the brand, and my induction was, here's a file folder with all of the stuff you need, right? Here's a sell sheet, here's a PowerPoint template, here's the logo. And this was the logo that was in the file folder. Now, I was new. I didn't drink whiskey at the time. And I didn't go look on shelf for a couple of weeks and didn't realize this looked nothing like what was on pack at the time. The humans involved in this process hadn't updated our files. Our logos were out of date. And so I'm like, somebody's asking me, hey, Julie, do you have a logo? I'm like, yeah, I'll email this over to you. It was not right. So my first mistake, but a key learning. So I worked on the brand for a little while in Canada, and then I had an opportunity to come here to the UK and started as a global marketing manager. And when I was the global marketing manager, we were working with a completely different logo. And actually, the Canadian team had missed this update and had missed this opportunity. And yes, they did catch up, and we got kind of on board, and we started using the logo. But the reality of it is that there was this misalignment between what was happening on shelf, what was happening on our global marketing team, and then what was really happening in the field where people were actually promoting our brand, doing channel activations, sending logos to bars, and it was the wrong stuff. So at this point in the time, I have a question for you. Does anybody know what is a tround, other than Nick? Anybody, if you know what a tround is, just raise your hand, because I think we have limited speakability. See, there's lesson number 2, mistake. If you have to explain to everybody what you're talking about with your brand, maybe you need to think it through. So, Grant's Whiskey is in a tround-shaped logo. This is not a triangle, and it's not round, it's a tround. And the bottle is actually a tround shape. And if you've drunk Glenfiddich, you're going to know that it's in a tround shape as well. Really important brand story and a really important brand legend. Who here thinks that resonates with consumers and they can't wait to get their hands on a tround? No, absolutely nobody. Not human-centric, is it? But internally, we were so big on this tround. And we were really talking about this amazing brand. And when I went into the global team, we were tasked with how do we make this logo a bit more usable? Because this logo, as you might see, when you were trying to put it into spaces, into channels, is actually quite an awkward shape. And we were repackaging, and there was lots of other refreshes happening on the brand. So we were like, let's refresh our logo. Let's redo the help with the branding. And we were looking at this amazing history. So Grant's Whiskey, if you don't know it, started in 1887 by William Grant. So over 100 years of history on this brand. In a lot of global markets, it's the 1, 2, 3 on the podium position of best-selling Scotch whiskies. Highly awarded, amazing whiskey, a master blender who's outstanding in his industry. Great amount of oak aging here with a really unique marrying process. All this amazing depth of story. 5 generations since 1887. All of this amazing thing. So we took this logo and we refreshed it to something. Prepare yourselves, because I think you're going to be blown away. We added a tree. Remember, it's a disaster class. So for us, we were caught up in our internal narrative. We were trying to premiumize the brand. We were talking about 5 generations. Come on, who here counted how many branches are here on the tree? There's 5 generations. Yeah, I mean, I was talking to myself, wasn't I? It just wasn't going to help on the branding. But we had a great internal story. And we were really trying to, at the time, there was some context around what was happening. So let me reassure you, I wasn't fired over this disaster. We were selling lots of great whiskey. But as a global team, I think one of the best tests that you can do when you develop something is to release it into the wild. And into the wild, you must release things because people need to promote your brand. You cannot retain control. So here in the UK market, we gave them our logo, gave them our new positioning, and we said, what can you do? Now, we were trying to modernize the brand, be future-facing, talk about new evolution, bring the digital marketing content into this, and we ended up with a family tree. But look, there's a lovely, lovely tree, lots of little trees appearing. Again, we weren't consumer-centric. So when I talk about the lessons I learned, we were, from a human point of view, we were navel-gazing. We were really in our own heads, and we did consumer research. I promise you, I took this to consumer groups. But consumer groups can prove your own bias, can it, if you're not careful? And so what we ended up with was not exactly where we wanted the brand to go. So, do you want to see what it looks like now? So I've been out of the brand for a while. What do you think? Is the tround still around? Oh, or is it still triangle? Yeah. That's from the website, as it appears 3 days ago. So there's a G trying to turn into an icon. I see why. I can see a hint of a tround happening in that G. And then I can see this on their pack. You can see can you see this? This shield is actually starting to get tround-shaped on the label. I see why they've done it. I get it. I mean, it's like preaching to me, though. I'm not sure from a consumer point of view, if I hadn't said tround, everybody in this room would have followed along. But there you go. Still a great whiskey, though. So, from William Grant & Sons, I then moved on, and I went to go work at House of Suntory, so Suntory Spirits, as it's known now. Suntory Spirits really attracted me because after, I think it was 12 years at William Grant & Sons, I became a proper whiskey nerd. I absolutely love whiskey. I love all manners of whiskey from every country of origin, and I had a chance to go work on Japanese whiskey and go to Japan. I was like, sign me up, I'm in. And while I was there, actually, funny enough, because I am Canadian, the actual category I fell in love with was American bourbon whiskey and Maker's Mark. Absolutely great brand story, fabulous history. Maker's Mark's story begins in like 1953, and it's a husband and wife who really created the brand. And Margie Samuel's husband, Bill, was in the distillery burning the recipe, as the legend goes. He didn't want the mash bill. He wanted to put in soft winter wheat, which is why the whiskey tastes amazing. Margie was in charge of the marketing. And Margie was tasked with creating what is now the iconic pack. And if you go to the Maker's Mark Distillery in Loretto, Kentucky, you will still see the pack looks very close to how she created it. Margie's idea came from her experience as a silver collector. Who here has watched Antique Roadshow? Yeah, okay, good. You know, when you get a piece of silver, they all have to look on the bottom and look for the mark of the maker. So that's where Maker's Mark comes from. And that's the logo that actually is that Maker's Mark emblem. It's terrible slides on my screen. Sorry, next time I'll do high res, but it sits here. And Margie then also took her red wax candle, boiled it in the kitchen pot, and hand dipped it. And that is really supposed to be the top of it, that red seal that denotes the craft. So again, absolutely amazing heritage story. I came into the brand, and the brand world, there's the logo. The brand world looked like this. It was really black. It's a very big selling brand in the US. So all of our advertising and campaigns were all US-centric. And it was quite funny, a little bit political, a little cheeky in the US, but none of it resonated when you left the US. It was a very American-centric advertising. And so we needed to break out of the barriers and talk about what were we going to do to make it a bigger deal internationally. And at this point in time, I was no longer working on the global brand. I had gone to local. So I went from being theoretical driven and into having to execute it here in the UK domestic market. And the brand team at the time, in order to kind of resonate, decided to redo the brand world. And they launched a new brand world that is developed, with an amazing amount of care and craftsmanship, and released it into the wild. And it looked like this. So that's the new brand world. This is all available online. If you search, there's a case study from, I think it was Duckworth, the agency that did it. Absolutely beautiful. If you get to watch the video, they actually hired a wood carver who did the wood carving to then stamp it, to digitize it. The story of how they created the brand world is, as a marketer, absolutely beautiful. It's stunning. It's flexible, it's fluid, it's been devised to allow the in context to be, made appropriate for what it is. For me, what I love about it is I actually love this stylized red dip, and it becomes more iconic. And for us, from a consumer point of view, that red dip stands out on bars. It's how consumers navigate it. It stands out on shelf. It does the job in the retail. Like tick, 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 tick. Absolutely beautiful. So I loved it. But I was in the UK, and we got presented this, and I knew as a global marketer, there was probably 750 million PowerPoint slides explaining this. I know there is. I've worked in the global marketing too long. There's videos, there's consumer research, there is a ton of work behind it. But in the UK, we were actually given screen resolution only images. And what we didn't get was actually a depth of assets that we could be flexible with. What we were given was a great visual idea, but we had to spend the local money. And when it comes to spending budget, if you're creating a brand, you want the humans involved in this process to be able to take it and interact with it and use it the way you want them to, ideally, with a framework, but to do it instantly, not to go spend another agency's money to go actually make it possible and usable. It needs to be something they can do. We didn't. So we had to go create it. And the next slide I'm going to show you is one of the things that I think is one of the most fascinating things I do whenever I see a brand that I like, is I go see what it looks like in the real world. And as a marketer, don't kill me if anybody works, and I think we're sponsored by Tesco, but actually I think brands go to die in Tesco. It is, if you do not have your brand set, Tesco is an amazing distribution. I'm a loyal shopper. I'll show you my loyalty points. Absolutely love them. But Tesco does not build your brand. You have to build your brand outside of Tesco. Somebody's buying it. But you can see they took a beautiful brand world, and I think actually the least interesting part of the brand world exists now in it on shelf. And even on Amazon, same thing. So we have a very fluid and flexible world, but actually it ends up looking really same. It's a bit cookie cutter, which is a real shame because it's actually a beautiful brand world. So that was what happened while I was working on the brands. Shall we look at what does it look like now? Because I'm not there anymore. Actually, it still looks very much the same. It's fairly recent work. They're still embedding it. They haven't, this is off their website. This is actually a video that shows them hand dipping the bottle. Because I think it's a really big, important part of the brand story. It's a shame. I think they could use that icon. Personally, if they call me back and said, what should we do? I'd be like, lean in on that icon. And the pack still looks exactly the same. The consistency of what Maker's Mark does is absolutely amazing. But for me, those kind of mistakes, again, go back to those three factors that I talked about in the beginning. The humans involved in this brand and the humans involved in selling it and how that gets cascaded. Our commercial marketing team uses the same image when it goes to Tesco and Asda. How can you break out of that when you want to be really flexible and iconic brand? It's tough. And yeah, it's a beautiful brand world. So moving on to next. I then left spirits for a little while and took a role with Lion. So Lion is a big Australian beer giant, and they had bought 2 craft breweries here in the UK and launched one as well. And I had an opportunity to go work there as the marketing director and worked on what is 4 Pure beer. So 4 Pure is based in the Bermondsey Beer Mile. It's here in London. Show of hands, who's been to the Bermondsey Beer Mile? Some of you, good, cool. It's great beer down there. If you haven't done it, actually, it's a great night out. It's really good fun. There's so many great independent craft breweries still here in London and probably desperate to get some support right now. So this one I've got a question. So not many of you are familiar with it, but can anybody recognize from your world of life in London and the UK, which one is the 4 Pure logo? You can hold up your finger. 1, 2, 3. I got lots of ones, so if somebody's in the know, a couple of 2s and a 3. Okay, so 4 Pure, when it was created in 2011, okay, 2011, it looked like this by the 2 founders. One of them was really into travel and adventure. Started up the Bermondsey Brewery, a small little tap room down at the end of the Bermondsey Beer Mile. Great beer. Then they repacked, and it looked like this. And then they repacked, and it looked like this. And then they repacked again, and it looked like this. Illustration starts to come into the story. Every craft beer, even sodas, a lot of illustration and the design aesthetics going on. And then it looked like this. This is when it was acquired by Lion. Lion introduces this logo. Now, I know branding 101, consistency. First of all, humans, on the first point that I make, humans, who follows the journey and can recognize that? That's since 2011. It's not that much time. Number 2, the kind of meaningfulness. We're in Bermondsey, on the Beer Mile. Did anybody recognize this mountain that's here in London? Yeah, I didn't think so. I mean, I know what they're doing. They're trying to connote adventure. But there was so much changes and nothing consistently brought across the packs. But anyway, that Lion wasn't done. They did one more rebrand, really trying to take advantage of more mainstream opportunities. If I've been working in craft brewing, you know, craft brewing has a pointy end of the stick where it's very much about independence and small entities. And when Lion bought this kind of startup, it changed the feel of the brand and it changed some of the consumer interrelationships in it. So Lion repacked it, keeping in mind they wanted to really focus on Tesco, and it went to this. Now, this is when I joined. I had to play with the hand I was dealt. Had I been there, I would not have done this, personally. I mean, I think it's beautiful when I look at it in isolation, but going back over the history, I mean, this is the one thing that a CMO once said to me, is like, if you want to build a brand that you've worked on that has a history, go look at its archive. Find the moment in time when it was successful and understand what was going on. Always look a little bit back before you look forward. But you can see, huge jump. And guess what? Did consumers recognize our pack from this to this? Absolutely no. Everyone's shaking their heads. No, they couldn't. They didn't come on the journey with us. And even though it's a really beautiful pack and it is really well done by the agency, did an outstanding job, ended up with a great look and feel. It does stand out on shelf in Tesco. It met the brief. It did what it was supposed to do. But as a marketer now, my disaster class, looking back, we spent all the money on the rebrand. We had no budget left. We then took all of our distinctive, memorable assets. Is anybody reading Byron Sharp? Anything that you recognize from marketing, there was nothing consistently brought onto the pack. And so consumers were lost. And our customers were a little lost as well. We had some big support from some retailers, though, so that continued to keep the brand alive. But nonetheless, I live with this thinking as a marketer, I'm never going to do that again. So that is, I believe, should we look at what it looks like now? If I'm nothing if not consistent, actually. This is the website as it is this week. Exactly the same. And the packaging, digitized, sorry, but this is exactly it. The pack that looks the same. What I had to do was put in rules and regulations and actually understand how are you going to use that brand. So as to my very beginning story, how do I create that into a logo that our commercial, the humans involved in our sales business can actually use, which as you can see becomes a bit of a challenge because the way the logo sits on this can looks amazing on the can, but actually taking it off the can into the channel, into like on-trade posters, into even Endel displays, it became very challenging dynamic to work with in terms of how it sat. So it had a slightly different visual. But dealt that hand and we had to go forward. But as I said, really did lead me to come to you today and talk about where I made mistakes and what are the learnings I've had as a result. And these are the three considerations that are really key to me. I look at the humans involved in the process. I look at the consumers. I look at the people in my business, from senior stakeholders down to everybody who has to touch it and sell it. They're so important to this part of the business and part of what I do. Is it memorable and meaningful? So how have I created meaning? So the Grant's Whiskey one, I tried to infuse meaning through a tree. I mean, you can't. It has to naturally be there. There has to be a very simple reason for it to be there, and it has to fit the category. Cohesive and consistent. Trying to do something super flexible, what happens? I think people are like water. If you pour water on the ground, what does it do? It finds the path, doesn't it? It goes the easiest way. That is what everybody involved in your brand is going to be like about your brand. You need to be like water. If you try to make something too flexible, what do? They're going to be like water. They're going to make it too easy. It needs to be something that everyone can use. It's not easy, is it? Branding, I hope you weren't coming here going, here's the 3 steps that are going to make your brand awesome. I got to tell you, I've done this for a while. It's not that easy. But my next challenge is to you. What mistakes have you made? Stop for a moment and actually think about it. Presenting today made me stop and think. And I really think it's actually a great idea to stop and have a bit of a moment and think, what mistakes have you made? I'm going to put a posting up on my LinkedIn profile today about this talk. Please follow me, write a comment, and tell me, what mistakes have you made? Share it. Be bold. That, after all, is the MadFest challenge to you today. Thank you, guys.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Julie.